Sue Johanson.
Sue Johanson.
She really is famous.
Infamous would probably be the word.
She hit the airwaves gangbusters. Nobody had seen anything like this before.
Nobody talked openly about this.
I think Sue was revolutionary.
Sue was a woman on television talking about sex. That is something radical.
Jane, your mother's legacy is really, I think, underestimated, and it takes a documentary to give it its proper due. She was out there to help people. And it took off. And there's a moment when she's in New York and people are shouting and clapping, and a huge crowd. And she was genuinely surprised, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I think it took the whole, right to the very end when she retired, I think she was gobsmacked that people recognized her, knew her intimately well, would cross the street, hug her, and felt like that she was their grandmother. She was family. And
Yes.
and that does her justice because she created that warmth. She created that circle that allowed people to feel that way towards her. And that's a real testament.
Lise, you opened with a very funny sequence, but I think it was right to do it. Get right into the subject matter concerning toes. was that decision made easily?
You know what? It's such a decision on what should be the first moment in a film, as one could guess. But it was made easy in that we wanted to really open with Sue talking about pleasure. You know, you see in this clip that she's just trying to figure out a way to emphasize pleasure, to answer this question. And I think it really speaks to Sue talking about sex in a way no one else was at the time. She focused on pleasure when people were talking about reproduction, when people were talking about, just don't do it. Don't do it until you're married. So we wanted to really showcase that. And also that Sue was non-judgmental. I think that's what made her so special, is regardless of the question that she was asked, even if they knew it was a prank call that somehow got through, Sue would just honest and openly give information. And it was because she knew that even if that were a prank call, someone else at home would have that question. And she just wanted people, to feel like it was okay in their sexual desires. So that was the thought behind that opening clip.
And Jane, you mentioned she was grandmotherly, and maybe a mother wouldn't, in some circles, but a grandmother might say to you, you can talk to me about anything, right? It's a bit close perhaps with your mother. Maybe she didn't speak with you about sex, for instance.
Well, I didn't ask her. She would have. Absolutely. Oh my God, she would have knocked my door down to get into my room to sit on the bed. Very good question. Very good question. Why did I not ask my mom? When you're a teenager, there's just something very awkward about the relationship that you have with your mother and your father. And I think across the board, if you were to ask anybody, did you talk to your parents about sex? Across the board, most of them would say no. So it didn't matter if your parents were religious or if they were a famous sex educator. I could not talk to my mom about sex because also it wasn't cool at the time. And right. I grew up in a time when that was important, and I was a teenager, so I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
In hindsight now, I would absolutely go to my mom. Absolutely. I wouldn't even think twice about it.
Lise, what do you how did this come into being? I'm glad that it's happening now while Sue is still alive. And tell me about it.
Jane was working on filming her mom before I came on board, and then we connected. And I think it was, it was time for Sue's legacy to be put on the screen. I think, it's a relevant time to amplify the message of this woman who was radical at the time, who was speaking open and honestly about sex in this way that wasn't shameful. And, we live in a time where there's pushback against us having ownership over our bodies, against women's rights, against, sexuality. And so it felt like the right time to get Sue's message out there. And not only just Sue's message, but to show how sex educators today, are pushing back against us not having control over our own sexuality, and they're trying to do the work that Sue was doing back then. So I think Jane and I knew it was the right time for this film. I think people that grew up with Sue are going to absolutely love learning about her and what motivated her. But people that don't know anything about her, I think it's the right time to bring, the sex positive message to them as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about the right time. And you mentioned in the documentary that many American callers were sexually illiterate. And of course, we see what's going on down there. And I mean, it's a bit of a political statement too, but a very necessary one. How did Canada come off so lucky?
I think we like creating that kind of binary that, we have everything better up here and the States is awful. And I think, in terms of sex education, there is some, that is right in certain circumstances, because the church really got into sex education, and there's politics in sex education in the States that, made sure it was abstinence only. But, we're not so great up here. I think our sex education is provincial, so it's just legislated provincially. And then it's really left up to the school boards and teachers about what they're going to teach, especially back in the day. It's gotten better now. But I would say, we did have better access, but it wasn't great. And luckily, we did have Sue, and she did educate millions of us. But yeah, so many people in the film said Americans needed Sue more than us because of how terrible their sex education was.
Sue Johanson.
She really is famous.
Infamous would probably be the word.
She hit the airwaves gangbusters. Nobody had seen anything like this before.
Nobody talked openly about this.
I think Sue was revolutionary.
Sue was a woman on television talking about sex. That is something radical.
Have I got an imagination? Oh, and there's more to come, believe me.
Sex with Sue premieres Monday, October 10th, exclusively on W.